Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're digging into something, well, a bit sprawling. It's this intersection of high finance, how people actually invest in property, the deep history of how our cities got shaped.
And the psychology behind it all, right?
Exactly. It's like an invisible architecture. It dictates how things like our homes, our neighborhoods get valued, how they're financed, and honestly, how they end up segregated.
Yeah, it's a fascinating stack of material we've got. Investment guides showing you exactly how to flip a distressed property, sitting right next to historical records showing how government policy literally mandated segregation.
So our mission today is try and pull out the key threads from all this. What are the forces that actually determine value? What drives inequality? And what's really transforming the American city?
It's really a look at how places get built, bought, and sometimes, well, exploited by these much bigger systems.
Absolutely. We're going to swing from personal investment strategies, how you might build wealth over time, all the way up to the huge high-stakes finance that, led to things like the 2008 crash.
And we'll keep coming back to a few core ideas. This whole debate about intrinsic value, the reality of risk, how irrational markets can be.
And the sheer power of systemic decisions, especially government ones. So let's jump in. Where do we start? Maybe with the basics of financial value.
Yeah. Okay. So the big question first. Is value even real? Like fundamentally?
Good question. One side says yes, definitely. That's the firm foundation theory.
Right. This is the comforting idea. It argues every investment, a stock, a house, whatever, has a real intrinsic worth you can figure out.
Quantifiable, like a number.
Exactly. And you calculate it based on, careful analysis, present conditions, future prospects, usually some kind of discounted cash flow model, a DCF.
And the idea is simple.
Yeah.
If the market price is lower than your calculated value, you buy. If it's higher, you sell.
Sounds neat. Rational. Tidy.
But the sources immediately poke holes in it.
Yeah,
because those calculations, they're not objective.
Not at all. They're based on estimates. Guesses, really, about the future. How long will this company grow fast? 10 years? 11 years? Who really knows?
And if you run the numbers, and the current price is just a little bit higher than your first calculation.
Yeah.
What's the temptation?
Oh, yeah. You tweak the numbers. You nudge that growth estimate from 10 years to 11, or maybe you lower the discount rate just a hair, just enough.
To make the math justify the price you already want to take.
Precisely. It's confirmation bias dressed up as finance.
And history is kind of brutal on this. We remember the world-changing companies, but forget the investors who funded them initially.
Right. The sources point this out clearly, even putting aside outright fraud, the earnings before I tricked the dumb auditor kind of stuff.
Huh.
Even then, investing in genuinely transformative tech, like railroads back in the 1950s or the first airlines, it often didn't pay off for the investors.
They changed society, but the people putting money in early often got wiped out or saw mediocre returns.
Because the key isn't just growth or impact, it's profitability. Consistent, sustained profits. That's what actually rewards capital long term. Exuberance about the next big thing often crashes against that reality.
Okay, so if the firm foundation is shaky because of human bias and future uncertainty, what's the alternative view, this random walk idea?
Yeah, this flips it. The basic idea, the weak form, is simple. You can't predict future stock prices based on past stock prices, period.
Because if you could, the pattern would get exploited instantly and disappear.
Exactly. And the reason is that news, the information that moves prices, has to be random. If it were predictable based on past news, well, it wouldn't be news, would it? It'd already be priced in.
Which connects to the efficient market hypothesis, the idea that the market is so fast, so full of professionals, that prices adjust almost instantly to any new information, making it basically impossible for any one person to consistently beat the market. You're up against the collective brain power of, well, everyone trying to do the same thing. But then, how do you explain bubbles? Tulip mania, the dot-com crash. People clearly go mad in herds, as the saying goes. That doesn't sound very efficient.
That's the big challenge, and where behavioral finance comes in. Efficient market folks say, well, rational traders, the arbitrageurs, should fix any mispricing. If tulips get too expensive, they'll short them.
But they often can't, right? Or they don't.
Right. There are limits to arbitrage. Maybe the irrationality lasts longer than the rational traders can stay solvent. Maybe they don't have enough capital to fight the herd, so prices can stay detached from that supposed fundamental value for a long time.
Okay, so value is debatable, markets can be irrational. And let's pivot to real estate, because it seems to have this built-in advantage, something separate from market theories, the tax stuff.
Absolutely. This is huge. Real estate gets treated very favorably in the tax code almost everywhere. It's structured as a tax-advantaged vehicle.
And the justification for that is,
The official rationale is usually about encouraging investment, supporting business owners, developers, people who supposedly create jobs in housing by putting capital to work in the community, rewarding the risk takers, the doers.
through things like depreciation write-offs.
Depreciation is the cornerstone. It's an accounting concept, the idea that a building wears out over time. Crucially, it's an expense you deduct on your taxes, but it's not actual cash leaving your pocket.
Okay, walk me through that. How does it work in practice for an investor?
Sure. Let's say your rental property brings in, I don't know, $15,000 in actual cash profit after you pay the mortgage, taxes, insurance, repairs, money in your bank account.
Okay.
But the tax rules might let you deduct, say, $10,000 for depreciation that year, plus maybe another $5,000 in mortgage interest and other deductible expenses.
So $15,000 cash income, $15,000 deductions.
Means zero taxable income on that property.
Yep.
You pocket the 15 grand, but legally, for tax purposes, you made nothing. It's incredibly efficient.
Yeah, and can it get even better?
Oh yeah, especially if you have multiple properties. You might have total deductions, including depreciation, that are more than your cash flow. Say $18,000 in deductions against $15,000 in cash flow. That creates a $3,000 paper loss
Which you can then use.
to offset mother income, like your salary from a regular job. So it directly reduces your overall tax bill. It's a foundational piece of why real estate builds wealth for many people.
And then there's the 1031 exchange. Another big tax advantage for keeping that wealth compounding.
The 1031 is critical for growth. It lets you sell an investment property that's gone up in value.
For a profit.
Right. And instead of paying capital gains tax on that profit right away, you can roll the entire amount your original investment plus the gain into buying another like-kind investment property.
As long as you follow the rules.
Yeah.
Specific timelines for identifying the new property and closing.
Correct. If you do it right, you defer the tax. Maybe indefinitely if you keep exchanging. It means all your capital stays working for you, growing geometrically, instead of giving a chunk to the government every time you sell.
What if you want to take some cash out during the exchange?
That's called boot. Any cash you pull out that doesn't go into the new property is considered boot, and that part becomes taxable immediately. The rest of the gain you reinvest is still deferred. It strongly incentivizes keeping the money in the game.
That idea of keeping capital deployed leads us straight into the practical strategies.
Mm-hmm.
The BRRR model seems really popular. Buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat.
Yeah, BRRR is all about forcing appreciation. You're not just waiting for the market to go up. You find a property, usually one that needs work, and you buy it below market value.
Buy.
Then the rehab. You fix it up strategically, focusing on improvements that add more value than they cost. The goal is to significantly increase its after-repair value, the ARV.
So you're manufacturing equity through sweat and smart spending.
Exactly. Then rent. You get a tenant in there, stabilize the property, make it income-producing.
And then the crucial step, refinance.
Right. You go to a bank, and they appraise the property based on its new higher ARV, not what you paid for it. You take out a new loan, ideally pulling out your original investment, plus maybe even some profit.
And because it's loan proceeds, that cash you pull out generally isn't taxed right then.
Correct. Tax-free return of capital or tax-free loan money. And the sources say it's not all that uncommon to pull out more cash than you initially put in for the purchase and rehab combined.
Which means you now own a cash-flowing rental property with essentially none of your own money left in the deal. Ready for the last R.
Repeat. Take that capital you pulled out and do it again. That's the compound progression engine. It's geometric. Your money starts working much faster than simple linear savings.
Leverage is key here, obviously. Using borrowed money.
Absolutely. Real estate fortunes are often built on financing, buying assets, letting tenants pay down the debt over time. Leverage magnifies your returns and your risks, of course. Needs careful management.
What about tools like HELOCs, home equity lines of credit? How do they fit in?
HELOCs can be really useful, especially for the BRRR strategy. Unlike a regular mortgage where you get a lump sum up front, a HELOC lets you draw money as you need it, up to a certain limit.
More flexible.
Very. And typically during the draw period, you only pay interest on the amount you've actually borrowed. So for the rehab phase, you can pull money out to pay contractors bit by bit, keeping borrowing costs lower. Then, ideally, you pay off the HELOC balance when you do the big refinance.
Okay, so you've got the property. Now, management. The sources have some interesting, maybe counterintuitive advice on avoiding landlord's burnout. It's not about maximizing rent.
Not necessarily squeezing every last dollar, no. The advice is that landlords who push rents to the absolute top of the market often deal with constant turnover. Vacancies, screening new tenants, fixing things up between tenants. It's costly and stressful.
So the alternative strategy is,
Set rents slightly below the market rate.
really, why?
It attracts better tenants, people who aren't financially stretched thin. They're more likely to stay longer, reducing vacancy costs. Plus, combine that with requiring a larger than average security deposit.
As a filter.
Exactly. It screens for financial stability and seriousness right at the start. And of course, keep the property in excellent condition. Good tenants appreciate that and stay. You trade a little bit of monthly income for a lot less hassle and turnover expense.
Makes sense long term. And as you scale up, you can't do it all yourself. Delegation.
Crucial. A real manager supervises. They don't unclog toilets at 2 a.m. You need systems. Maybe a reliable handyman or a caretaker for small stuff, or eventually a full property management company. Frees you up to find the next deal.
Delegation also ties into liability, doesn't it? Landlords have this duty of care.
Yes, a significant legal responsibility. Landlords generally have a duty to inspect the property for unsafe conditions. The key times are when you first rent it out, when you renew a lease, and when you extend a lease.
Those specific moments trigger the duty.
Right. If someone gets hurt due to an unsafe condition and you hadn't inspected at one of those required times, the law might assume you had foreknowledge you knew or should have known about the danger. Negligence there can be very costly.
What about protecting the asset itself? Say you own properties free and clear, no mortgage. Big target for lawsuits.
It can be. So there's a technique called equity stripping or equity transfer. The idea is that debt acts as asset protection. A creditor usually has to get behind existing liens.
So you put debt on it yourself.
Essentially, yes. You might take out a legitimate loan against the property, maybe through a separate entity you control, and secure it with a mortgage or deed of trust. This encumbers the property, reducing the accessible equity for a potential future creditor.
But the timing is critical here, right?
Absolutely critical. You must do this before you get sued, or even before you reasonably anticipate being sued. If you do it after a claim arises, it'll likely be seen as a fraudulent conveyance, an attempt to cheat creditors, and a court will void it. It has to be part of a pre-existing legitimate asset protection plan.
Shifting gears a bit, the sources also highlight the human cost in this system. The eviction data from Milwaukee is pretty stark.
It really is. It shows the deep poverty involved. The median income for households in eviction court was just $935 a month. These are often working-age people, median age 33, just trapped in economic precarity.
And the impact on families, having children, almost tripled the odds of getting an eviction judgment.
Yeah, statistically equivalent to being 4 months behind on rent. It shows how vulnerable families with kids are in the low-end rental market. The system isn't kind. And for landlords dealing with tenants in these situations, the sources give strong warnings. Collecting cash rent door to door. Very risky. You become a target.
And the legal side.
Yeah.
Trying to evict someone yourself.
Absolutely forbidden. The example given is the landlord going in while the tenant's out and taking their stuff. That's illegal self-help eviction. Doesn't matter how far behind they are on rent. Doing that opens you up to a lawsuit, potentially much worse than the unpaid rent. You have to use the formal legal eviction process, slow as it might be.
Okay, we've looked at individual strategies. Now let's pull the lens back. How did the landscape itself, our cities and suburbs, get shaped this way? The sources point to a really deep history.
Yeah, a fundamental distrust of city life in the American psyche seems key. This long-standing preference for a detached house, somewhere quiet, safe. It goes back centuries. Trying to find that balance between city and country.
And that shaped development patterns early on.
Definitely. Even before cars were common, you had the elite railroad suburbs after the Civil War. People commuting into the city for work but living outside. That set the image of suburbia as affluent, separate. The disjuncture between work and home started early.
The architecture reflects these shifts, too, from early timber frames.
Right, and the log cabin, which we think of as quintessentially American, but it's actually a Nordic building tradition originally.
Then later styles brought more internal structure, like federal and neoclassical.
Exactly. That's when you start seeing dedicated rooms, closets, butlers' pantries. Homes became more specialized internally, sometimes ditching grand staircases for efficiency.
And then regional styles, like Spanish Mission.
Popular around 1890, 1920, yeah. You know, the curved parapets, red tile roofs, exposed rafters, very distinct.
And post-war, the ranch and split level became dominant. Less about style, more about type.
Right. Defined by features like the low profile, maybe some fixed blinds, wrought iron supports, often brick veneer on parts. Building types designed for mass production and the suburban ideal of the 1950s and 60s.
But this wasn't just organic preference. The sources make it clear federal policy pushed this suburban model and did so in a way that enforced segregation.
This is the really troubling part. The creation of the national mortgage market, heavily influenced by the Federal Housing Administration, the FHA, was explicitly designed to favor suburban single-family homes.
And they didn't just favor them, they often required segregation.
Yes, the FHA recommended and frequently demanded that developers include racially restrictive covenants in the deeds of the houses they were financing.
Like written right into the legal document for the property.
Exactly, barring sale or rental to African Americans and sometimes other groups. The example given is St. Anne, a suburb, where the deeds explicitly said only those of the Caucasian race could live there. The FHA financing depended on it. This wasn't accidental, it was policy. Systemic redlining built into the foundation of American suburbs.
Zoning laws then came in and layered on top of this.
Zoning added another layer of control. The initial justification was partly about protecting property values, keeping undesirable uses like factories away from nice residential areas, and implicitly keeping undesirable people out too.
But the way zoning was applied had unintended consequences.
Well, maybe intended by some. Early on, people thought you could still have separated uses within walking distance houses here, a small shop district nearby.
Right.
But when zoning got applied across huge areas in the mid-20th century, separating homes from jobs, from shopping by miles.
It basically made cars essential.
Yeah.
And required massive highway construction.
Precisely. Large-scale zoning created the dependency on cars and fueled sprawl.
And this segregationist impulse even infected public housing.
Tragically, yes. The Chicago Housing Authority, with federal knowledge and complicity, deliberately chose sites for public housing projects to maintain racial segregation in the city.
A court actually found this.
Yes. A court found that race was the only plausible explanation for why over 99.5% of proposed units for white neighborhoods were vetoed by local officials. It was intentional, unconstitutional site selection.
Fast forward to today, and we see the legacy of this in our cities. Economic inequality gets worse as cities get bigger.
It's a striking correlation the sources highlight. In large metro areas, over 1 million people, nearly 70% have a bigger gap between high-wage and low-wage workers than the national average. The bigger and denser the city, the more economically segregated it tends to become.
Which leads to this creative class issue and displacement in the big superstar cities, New York, SF, LA.
Right. Success breeds its own problems. Gentrification, driven by high earners, pushes up housing costs so dramatically
that the middle class, the artists, the journalists, the people David Byrne worried about in NYC can't afford to live there anymore.
Yeah, he called it the city's cultural undoing. When the people who make a city interesting and vibrant get priced out, you risk ending up with, essentially, wealthy ghettos, cultural monocultures.
And we see this playing out differently in various neighborhoods. Logan Square in Chicago
went through huge shifts. From Scandinavian and Polish working class to a hub for Puerto Ricans facing gang issues, and now rapid gentrification changing its character again.
Versus somewhere like Bushwick in Brooklyn,
where despite new, relatively affluent people moving in for cheaper rents, it's still fundamentally a poor neighborhood. High asthma rates linked to old industrial sites exist side by side with trendy cafes. The inequality is just right there on the surface.
Okay, so historical policy laid the groundwork, but modern finance really pours gasoline on the fire, right? Especially with urban speculation. Stuyvesant Town Peter Cooper Village in New York is a huge example.
Oh, absolutely. A massive complex, historically middle class, stable, used to have a 20-year waiting list, believe it or not.
And then Tishman Speyer bought it for, what was it, over $5 billion?
Wow. $5.4 billion. A staggering price, based almost entirely on speculation about pushing rents way, way up. Specifically by converting thousands of rent-stabilized apartments to market rate.
They thought the existing market rate units were already underpriced.
By about 12%, yeah. But the real prize was the rent-stabilized units. They figured those were 30–40% below market. The whole plan was buy it, Aggressively push tenants out or find ways to deregulate, double the income, and flip it in a few years for a massive profit.
And a key part of that plan involved exploiting a tax loophole, the J51 program.
Exactly. This shows how tiny changes in legal interpretation can unlock billions in value, or perceived value anyway.
How did the J51 thing work? It was meant to encourage building improvements, right?
Right. Landlords got tax breaks, abatements for making upgrades. The original understanding was if you take the J51 benefit, the apartments in that building have to stay rent stabilized.
But the landlords found a way around that.
They pushed for an interpretation, which a city housing agency actually adopted, that hinged on adding one word solely to the understanding of the law.
Solely. Meaning
They argued that if the tax benefit wasn't solely the reason for the deregulation, or if it wasn't the only benefit received. Well, the argument gets technical, but the outcome was clear.
they could deregulate anyway.
Yes. This interpretation allowed landlords across the city, including at Studytown, to start deregulating thousands of units, even while receiving J51 benefits. The source says over 4,000 apartments were deregulated at Studytown alone using this tactic. It was central to justifying that huge purchase price.
This kind of high-stakes bet feels very connected to the broader financial engineering leading up to 2008, that whole subprime boom.
Definitely. The sources call it the extension of credit by instrument. Lenders kept inventing new ways, new loan products.
To give mortgages to people who couldn't qualify the old-fashioned way, because they weren't keeping the risk anyway.
Precisely. They originated the loans and immediately sold them off to Wall Street banks like Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley.
Who then packaged them into those infamous CDOs, collateralized debt obligations.
Right. They'd pool thousands of these risky mortgages together, slice them into different risk levels or tranches,
Senior mezzanine equity.
and sell those slices off to investors around the world. The goal was to move the risk off their own books as fast as possible.
And this whole process spurred even more complex inventions, like the credit default swap, the CDS. What was that originally for?
Initially, CDSs were actually designed as a kind of insurance for the investment banks themselves, like for Howie Hubler's desk at Morgan Stanley, mentioned in the sources.
How so?
When they bought mortgages from lenders, they had to hold them for a while, warehouse them, before they had enough to create and sell the CDO bond. The CDS was meant to protect the bank's trading desk from the risk that the value of those mortgages might fall during that short holding period.
So insurance against their own inventory risk.
Exactly. But it quickly morphed into something else entirely. People started trading CDSs without actually owning the underlying bonds. You could just make a pure bet that a bond would default.
Which massively amplified the risk and leverage in the whole system.
Hugely. It became a multi-trillion-dollar speculative casino layered on top of the already risky mortgages.
And yet, despite spectacular failures like Citytown eventually defaulting, the sources say the big real estate firms and banks involved still managed to deliver huge returns to their investors through much of this period.
Oh, yeah. Returns of 20% or more weren't uncommon for the big private equity funds playing in this space. They exploited the loose lending, the fee-driven bankers eager to package and sell anything, and the complex structures that hid the real risk.
Privatize the gains, socialize the losses.
That's the pattern. The system allowed huge profits to be made on the way up, even if it was built on shaky foundations that eventually crumbled, hurting homeowners and the broader economy far more than the dealmakers themselves.
Underneath all this finance and policy, there's human behavior. The sources dive into the psychology of influence, how decisions actually get made, often irrationally.
Yeah, compliance professionals, salespeople, negotiators, they use specific tactics. One powerful one is commitment and consistency.
How does that work?
The goal is to get you to take a small step first. Make a small commitment, agree to something minor, maybe make a statement publicly. Once you've done that, your own internal need to be consistent makes you much more likely to agree to larger requests later that align with that initial step.
Like getting someone to agree to a small sign in their yard before asking for a big donation.
Exactly that kind of thing. Or in real estate, maybe getting you to agree in principle to a certain type of neighborhood before showing you specific, maybe slightly flawed houses there. You're already committed to the idea.
And then there's scarcity. That seems huge in real estate.
Oh, it's a core weapon of influence, as Cialdini calls it. We have this mental shortcut. If something is hard to get, it must be valuable. Availability equals quality in our subconscious.
Limited time offer, only 2 left. Another buyer is interested.
All scarcity tactics. They work because they trigger psychological reactance. We hate feeling like our freedom to choose is being restricted. When something becomes scarce, we want it more to preserve our sense of control. It's a powerful, almost primal response.
And we rely on these shortcuts more because we're just overloaded.
Totally. Our world is complex, fast-paced, full of information. When we're rushed, stressed, uncertain, we can't analyze everything deeply. So we tend to default to what the sources call a primitive but necessary single piece of good evidence approach.
Meaning we grab onto one salient feature and let that guide the whole decision. Is the house in the best school district? Ignore the leaky roof. Did the stock just go up? Ignore the terrible financials. We use one piece of data as a proxy for a full analysis because it's mentally easier.
Shifting from external influence to internal habits, the sources stress the power of tiny, consistent actions, that 1% better idea.
This is so fundamental, especially for long-term goals like building wealth or expertise. We overestimate big dramatic moments and vastly underestimate the effect of small daily improvements.
The math is pretty wild, right?
It's exponential. Getting 1% better each day for a year doesn't make you 365% better. It makes you 37 times better because of compounding. Conversely, getting 1% worse each day
Drags you down almost to zero. Exactly. So that habit of learning a little more, refining your process slightly, saving a bit more consistently, that's where the real leverage is over time. It's geometric.
So how do you build those positive habits? The sources mention a cycle.
Yeah, the 4 stages of habit formation. Cue. Make the trigger obvious. Like putting your running shoes by the door. Craving. You need the motivation, the desire for the reward. Response. Make the action itself easy to do. Don't start with a marathon, start with a walk. Reward. It has to feel satisfying immediately to close the loop.
This ties into the idea of becoming a level 10 person.
Right. The concept is you need to consciously invest time daily in developing yourself, your skills, your knowledge, your discipline to become the kind of person capable of achieving the success you want. It's not about waiting for success to happen. It's about becoming ready for it through consistent small steps, avoiding mediocrity.
Which is really just a result of that 1% decline, compounded.
Often, yes. The slow drift from not prioritizing that consistent daily improvement.
Okay, before we wrap up, we need to address some, let's say, highly contested claims that appeared in the source material. We need to report these impartially, just noting they were present.
Right. It's important to be clear we're relaying what's in the sources, not endorsing these views. For instance, there were assertions about a smart grid being installed globally.
With the claim that this grid would allow specific locations, including China and Israel, according to the source, to control energy and communications worldwide.
Yeah, that was in there. Also, some very strong and widely disputed claims about public health.
Specifically, the assertion that the concept of a virus has never existed, and that the COVID-19 situation was described as a hoax based on fraudulent testing. Again, relaying the source claim here.
And finally, there was a personal anecdote included.
About a man experiencing severe health issues after a vaccine loss of feeling in his legs, intense pain followed by, according to the anecdote, repeated misdiagnoses like allergies or sciatica before he was eventually admitted to a neurology ward.
So those narratives, those specific claims, were part of the diverse and sometimes conflicting materials we synthesized for this deep dive. #tag outro.
Wow. We've covered a lot of ground, from how financial theory tries, maybe fails, to define value, through the nuts and bolts of real estate investing and leverage,
Through the deep historical roots of segregation baked into our suburbs.
and the high-stakes financial games that can reshape entire cities, plus the psychology driving our choices through it all.
Yeah, what really stands out is how interconnected it all is. The value of a place isn't just bricks and mortar. It's tangled up in financial engineering, decades of policy decisions, things like redlining, zoning.
And just basic human irrationality and our mental shortcuts.
Absolutely. We saw that knowledge can be a real advantage, especially if others aren't bothering to learn, and that wealth, real wealth, is usually built through that relentless consistency over time, that 1% compounding.
So if knowledge itself is a habit built like any other, what's the one small thing, that repeatable action you listening can maybe take today? What's your 1% improvement for understanding the hidden forces shaping your own environment, your own town or city?
Just start there, small step.
And here's a final thought to chew on. That American dream, the detached house, quiet street, peaceful place, has been a powerful force for centuries driving suburban growth. But we also saw that clear link. Bigger metros tend to mean bigger economic divides. So the question is, can we pursue that personal desire for peace and quiet without, maybe unintentionally, contributing to the larger pattern of urban division and inequality? Something to think about.